Welcome to Aston Means Business. I'm Steve Dyson, the journalist presenting this regular podcast for Aston Business School. We're currently working with the Aston Centre for Growth to turn this podcast's attention towards how small businesses, known as SMEs, are coping with the economic shutdown caused by the coronavirus pandemic. This special series is called Aston Means Business, SMEs Dealing with COVID-19. We'll be talking to businesses who are taking part or who've previously taken part in Aston Centre for Growth's programmes, giving them a voice to discuss their challenges, share their experiences and explain how they're dealing with the crisis. We'll also be interviewing some of Aston Business School's top academics and other experts, getting their valuable insight, analysis and advice for SMEs. This episode will feature Olu Arugba. She's the founder and chief executive of Synergy Organisation Solutions, a management consultancy which aims to help businesses become more resilient. Also joining me is Mark Hart. He's the Professor of Small Business and Entrepreneurship here at Aston Business School and one of the top UK experts on SMEs. You'll have to bear with us a little bit because the recordings are all done remotely, and with some of the interviewees, the qualities are slightly different. So joining me first is Professor Mark Hart. Hello to you, Mark.
Good afternoon, Steve.
Now, Mark, we know the shutdown has created multiple challenges for all businesses: production, staffing, revenues, cash flow, even simply communicating to customers on what's happening. There's so much going on, so what do the leaders of SMEs need to do first to survive?
There's a number of things, Steve, that really is part of the resilience agenda, and sometimes I like to call it business continuity. And that may seem a strange phrase to use in the current context because it gives the impression of, business as usual, and that is far from the case. But I think, there's certain elements of being resilient to enable the business to continue. And it relates to a whole range of things that are pretty normal for a business leader to consider. So things like, the employees, the staffing, cash flow is crucial, of course, and chasing up unpaid bills is even more crucial at this particular time. Communications, making sure that the brand continues, if you like, that it gives the impression that there's at least the business is actually perhaps thinking about other things it needs to be doing to communicate with its customers. But business continuity is all about trying to be innovative in the current climate, and that's really, really important. As
the weeks go on, I guess that kind of effort by businesses will make them survive or not. It's literally survival of the fittest. How can SMEs become more resilient in terms of offering things in a different way?
I think it's listening to your customers. I've made this point over and over again on many occasions, but it's about understanding exactly how important your customers are to you and trying to address their particular needs at this time. So rather than saying to yourself, right, I've got a product or a service that I need to keep generating revenue from. And don't forget, Steve, we're talking about businesses who have decided not to furlough their workers, but actually to keep going. So let's be very clear about that. A lot of businesses I've been talking to have furloughed their workers. They are just, including themselves, by the way, if that's the way the company's been set up. And if you do furlough yourself as a company director, you obviously can only do the statutory things like filing accounts and stuff like that. But, a lot of the businesses I've been talking about is saying, okay, how do I begin to think about my customers? What are they going through at the moment? So it's about comms again, it's about dialogue, conversations. I'm still here, how can I help? And I'll go back to some simple basic things because, a value proposition of a business is all about the wants, needs and fears of your customers. In other words, what do they want? And then, sometimes it's better to say, well, actually, you don't want that. You need this if I've understood your problem. And that's really important to have those conversations. Now, to find customers in that position that are willing to have those conversations is another matter altogether, but I think it's really important that business owners do not bury their head in the sand. They're open for business, those that still are, and they're thinking about, well, how can I think about doing things slightly differently in my business? So I think that's what the resilience agenda is all about. It's also about making sure that, if you're still trading and the employees, you understand what they're going through as well. It's all about saying, we're hearing some horrible stories out there at the moment about the business leader wants to, keep going and forcing their employees to be rather uncomfortable in the workplace. That has to stop. This is a serious health crisis is not just an economic crisis. So having empathy with your workforce is really, really important, because when things are going well, your employees are your biggest asset. And, in a time of crisis, you can't just simply ignore them. You've got to work with them, understand their issues, and let them help you provide a continuous service to your clients.
Well, thanks, Mark. And if you can, stay with us, Mark. I'd be interested in your views on what our next interviewee has to say about how her management consultancy that specialises in resilience is approaching the COVID-19 crisis. Joining me online now is Olu Arugbu. She's the founder and chief executive of Synergy Organisational Solutions. Hello to you, Olu.
Hi, Steve. Really good to meet you.
Nice to meet you virtually as well, Olu. Olu, tell me a bit more about Synergy Solutions. Where are you based and what exactly do you do?
Okay. So Synergy Solutions is a specialist digital innovator and management consultancy practice. And our focus is really around blending customer experience that delivers specific customer metrics and linking that with new digital technology and also helping businesses to become much more resilient. So in terms of where we're based, we are based in Peterborough, and I set up the business in 2005, but we work all over, not just the UK, but also internationally.
Thanks, Olu. And perhaps just tell me a little bit more about the business structure in terms of how many staff and the average turnover, etc.
Yeah, so in terms of our business, we are a proper small business, a proper SME. So our model, so just to put it in context, before I set up my business in 2005, I was the commercial director of a consulting business, which was part of a global business process outsourcing company that was listed on the New York Stock Exchange. And we initially, as part of our model, we worked with consultants who were part of our full-time staff base. And we as a business at the time went through a bit of a restructuring, which meant that we had to shed quite a few staff, which was really difficult for us. And as a result of that, we changed our business model to become much more virtual, which meant that we utilize consultants, associate consultants, which meant that we engaged them on projects as we needed them. And once those client projects were completed, then they went on to work on other projects with their other clients. And when I set my business up in 2005, I adopted the same model. So prior to that, I initially started as a freelancer, focused on just delivering on client projects myself. I then scaled up the business and then used virtual consultants, and then moved into another model, which meant recruiting staff and having them on my base. I've now gone back to my original model, which is around having virtual consultants that I can utilize as and when I need them. And that works really well for me as a business. It gives me more flexibility, and it also gives builds relationships with a really strong team of experts who I can call in and add absolute value to our to our clients as needed.
So just quickly, with regards to COVID-19, the pandemic, how's that impacted your business?
Goodness, it has had a massive impact. So just to give you an indication, we were on the verge of signing a few deals, and then the COVID-19 pandemic hit. And they were then delayed. So we've had a number of scenarios where we were about to sign a deal and then they were deprioritized because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And then there were also instances where we actually started projects and they have been delayed because of COVID-19. So that's caused a massive challenge for us in that area. But at the same time, what it's also done is it's enabled us to, what I would say is pivot our service. So now we are being contacted by businesses who are interested in using some of our digital technology to help them to address some of the challenges around staff availability. So as you know, with the COVID-19 pandemic, that has resulted on real pressures on business around their staff availability, the need to continue to maintain their service levels, but their staff are either not working because they've become sick with COVID-19 or are concerned about sickness around COVID-19. So that has had a massive impact. So we are now being approached to help businesses to put in place technologies that reduces that pressure on the fact that they don't have the staff or as many staff as they needed or had previously, and at the same time enables them to deliver the service. So these are the things that we are being approached to support companies with, and we're now in conversations with companies around those areas.
So perhaps just give us a bit more detail for our listeners on perhaps some examples of how businesses can adapt, keep trading, become more resilient using your services.
Okay, thank you. So, Steve, I think it's really important, being resilient. So I would suggest that there are two ways of dealing with the situation. There is one which is, let's just continue business as usual and hope that things settle, which is one way. And that's not a way that I would recommend at all. It's a highly risky strategy. And there is another, which is we are involved or doing business in a radically different environment. So even when we talk about resilience is around building a strategy which is, really focused on we are going to deliver a resilient business, but things are changing so quickly. So I think it's really important for business to think about how do we as a business continue to deliver our service to our customers whilst maintaining the safety of our staff. So I think that these are questions that need to be addressed in terms of building resilience into the business and respond to COVID-19 and the issues relating to that. And what that then does is it causes businesses to really think about what are the risks in our business given those objectives, and how likely are those risks to happen, and what is the impact? Because again, that means that rather than trying to address everything and becoming completely overwhelmed with lots of detail and being bogged down in detail, they're starting to focus on, where are the biggest risks. Some of the risks that we're hearing from small business providers or small businesses is, cash flow. How are we going to continue to, either, provide our business or provide our services, moving forward? How are we going to be able to look after our staff and maintain our staff? So these are massive challenges for SMEs at this moment in time. Going a stage further, it's around putting in place, your contingency plans. So again, or your crisis planning. So making it very, very simple. So where are your risks? What is the impact? If it's cash flow, what can you do? How do you maintain the safety of your staff? And then what actions do we need to put in place in order to address those? So getting more money into the business, making sure that you're maintaining the well-being of your staff, because it's a really difficult time for them as well. And also understanding what technologies are available that you can use that are low cost, which means that you can continue your service, under very, very difficult, unprecedented conditions.
That sounds really good. And just to give us perhaps a practical day-to-day example with technology and virtual digital technology in mind in particular, give me an example of how a business might be doing this now or might be lined up to do this.
I've seen businesses with call centres suddenly finding that their staff and their ability to respond to their customers has been completely decimated because of COVID-19. So again, providing technologies where, if a customer has a problem, they're able to either go online, go on their smartphone, get the answers that they need, and only when they have an absolute issue that they can't solve by themselves, then they reach out to somebody. So that's all really good things that they can put in place. And those technologies are available right now. And it also relieves the pressure on already under fire staff because of this situation and SMEs.
Oh, that's really good. And I mean, when you're talking just now, it even reminds me what we're doing today, me and you now. I mean, I don't know exactly where you are. Are you sitting in Peterborough?
I am sitting in Peterborough, absolutely. So I'm sitting in my home in Peterborough, yes.
I'm sitting up here in Sutton Coldfield. We usually do these podcasts in a studio face-to-face. This one's been done via an online system, which at the end will make it sound as if you're in my room and I'm in your room. And that's all done via an online piece of technology, which is helping us to continue operations of our podcast. So it's a tiny micro example of what you're talking about.
Absolutely, Stephen. And this situation with COVID-19 is really forcing businesses and business owners to start thinking about how they can do their business in a different way. And what it's making them realize is the technology is available. And I know that it could be really overwhelming to understand what to use and what not to use, but that's where people like me can come in, help, either people like me or other specialists who can guide them, and that relieves the pressure on them. I would also say as well, beyond the technology, I think it's really important to utilize communities. So one of the things that I'm seeing is that a lot of business owners and also leaders, because it's very difficult, you become very focused on your own company. It's really important to share, this is what we've experienced with other people in the same situation so that you can learn from one another and, take that learning and apply that within your own business. That helps to relieve the pressure. It also helps to introduce new best practice, which you may not have had access to in the past. And I'm seeing that work really well at this moment in time. So there's a real sort of community spirit and a team spirit beyond, their own individual companies and going into other companies as well.
Great stuff. And I mean, just to end with, it's a bright moment in the COVID-19 pandemic, isn't it? I mean, it's the impact is terrible on all sorts of businesses, but there's a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel here.
There is a light at the end of the tunnel. So it is going to change the way people are working. The reality is, Steve, things will be very, very different. And I think it's really important. Yes, we have to focus on getting through this pandemic and all of the enforced isolation. But I think it's also important to think about post-COVID-19, what happens then, what can be put in place. And again, as part of the focus around resilience, start building those plans, that strategy. What's that going to look like for your business? And it's going to be, there are going to be different ways of doing things. There are going to be much more cost-effective ways of doing things. But there's also, ways of doing things that are going to engage your staff. Think about your people. They are valuable. And I think it's important for business owners, the way you treat your staff now during this crisis will determine how loyal they are to you post this crisis. So it's really important to think about their welfare and, balance that with the available technology, delivering the service and, getting through this situation. And we all doing this together and sharing that experience.
Olu, that's some fantastic insight and advice there. And thanks very much for joining us here on Aston Means Business today. For everyone listening, that was Olu Arugbu. She's the founder and chief executive of Synergy Organisational Solutions. Thank you, Olu.
Thank you for having me, Steve.
Hopefully, Professor Mark Hart is still with us. Hello to you, Mark.
Yeah, thanks very much, Steve.
Mark, I know...
Really interesting listening to Olu. I mean, obviously her business is all about resilience. That's what her value proposition is, advising, other businesses and her clients effectively of how to keep going. I guess when we first worked with Olu back in the day, that she didn't think that she'd be really having to deal with the scale of crisis, because her agenda is a resilience one, but resilience in the tooth of the gale is really quite a difficult one. But yeah, very interesting comments coming from Olu.
Yeah, what did you think about what she had to say about what businesses need to do?
I think she was spot on. I would agree with most of what she's saying, in fact, all of it. It's about the communications, it's about thinking about how, it's about the production, it's about staffing, it's about all the things that we need to be, running a business in normal time. But I think it's about keeping an eye on the strategy. Sometimes you can batten down the hatches too much, but it's about thinking about, what sort of a workforce have I got? Have I furloughed a number? Have I got a core workforce? Are they able to think about helping me develop a new suite of services in the marketplace. Who are my critical workers? I mean, I think that's something that this crisis has brought home to a lot of people, that I mean, all the staff are there for a particular reason, but perhaps who are the critical workers that are going to work with the business leader to keep the business surviving. I think that's really quite important. In terms of, it's about keeping the antenna up about how, behaviour's changing, how, from your customers and your suppliers' point of view, making sure you understand that their changed behaviours. Just don't assume that because you're trading as normal that they are, because they're obviously having the same issues as you are. And also, I think it's important, I mean, if you look at it from a social enterprise perspective as well, there's a lot of stakeholders there. We do a lot of work with social enterprises, social entrepreneurs at the Centre for Growth, and thinking about their stakeholders, their whole rationale for whether it's in terms of training of young people or reaching out to disadvantaged, etc. They need to be thinking about, well, how do they need to perhaps move into areas of activity which maybe won't bring them a revenue at this particular time. Obviously, working with vulnerable people, disabled, etc., is important. Making sure people are getting fed and getting housed. But I think what you're doing there is demonstrating your value to the community. You're building a brand. For me, you see, keeping the brand alive and in the forefront of people's minds is crucial. I see a lot of that in terms of looking at LinkedIn and Twitter at the moment, that businesses are stepping up, being innovative in what they're doing, but making sure that they're shouting about it. So again, it's about making sure the brand's developed. And I think that's something which is businesses should do it all the time, but at this time, don't ignore it. People will remember in 6 months, 12 months' time, those businesses that really, really, did things which were, beyond the norm.
Finally, Mark, just for the businesses listening, and to kind of encapsulate it in a takeaway moment for them, what are your top 3 tips for SMEs? What do they need to do now, immediately, to cope with this crisis flexibly?
I mean, one of the things that I've been thinking about is making sure that businesses know where their vulnerabilities are. What could really put them out of business very, very quickly. So what are they vulnerable to? Is it a staffing issue? Is it a key customer? So being very open with themselves about, how exposed am I here in terms of my business model? So making sure they're fully aware of that and take remedial action. It's about reputation at this time. I think it's important that we've seen some larger companies who are making their reputation is, if I can be so bold, almost in tatters. I think it's important for small business leaders to step up and make sure that their reputation as a great, manufacturer, great service provider is maintained, that you stand out from the crowd. And keep an eye on your finances. Make sure that you do not get into a position where you just run out of cash, because everything else may be in order, but if you run out of cash, you're gone. So it is about being honest about your vulnerabilities, where you're weak at this time. Think about the cash. And work on your reputation. Make sure that you've got the brand, as I was saying earlier, is flying the flag for what you do well, and don't lose sight of that. And perhaps even, I mentioned earlier, Steve, about the importance of our social enterprise businesses in the current climate. Maybe it's about all businesses to be thinking about their social agenda. Something we're very sort of strong on in the Centre for Growth, in terms of encouraging people to think about the social impact of what they do. And I think this crisis has brought that to the fore. So maybe that's how you build your reputation. That's how you actually do maintain your business continuity at this time, is to say, we're going the extra mile. We don't just operate in the community, we are part of the community. That's the advice I would give to all small business leaders out there.
That's excellent, Mark, and many thanks for taking the time to speak to us. It was great to speak to you again, and I'm sure we will soon once more with 1 or 2 other examples.
Always a pleasure, Steve. Thank you.
Thanks to both Professor Mark Hart of Aston Business School and to Olu Arugba of Synergy Organisational Solutions for joining us. What they both had to say about resilience is hopefully something SMEs will find really useful in this latest podcast in our special series. We'll be back in the next few days with more case studies of how businesses are coping and with more crucial analysis and advice from academics and experts here at Aston. Aston means business. SMEs dealing with COVID-19. Thanks for listening.